All right, friends. Well, good morning again. Today really is much more about a group discussion rather than practical tips, although I think maybe some practical tips will emerge from the discussion. But today we're talking about exploring diversity broadly, as particularly though, how are we engaging and exploring diverse opinions in the classroom? I'm sure now it's been more than half of the semester has transpired. I'm sure you all have your stories of diverse opinions in the classroom. And what we want to kind of interrogate today are the ways in which we can claim and kind of own our own spaces and our own opinions, and how do we deal with frictions when perhaps those rub up against someone else's. And then perhaps sometimes when do we need to just let it be. So really today is a lot of discussion. I only have 6 slides, I think. So if you're willing to talk and engage, then we'll do that. If not, it won't be that long. But first, I want us together, so either on your phones, your computers, etc. Y'all should know the first one by now, right? What is the difference between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2? Right? So there's a similarity, creation account, but there are differences, huge differences between them. Let's look together then. Let's have one or two people look at Mark 11, and then one or two people look at Matthew 12. I'll look at Matthew 21. I'll look at Matthew 21. And whoever gets that Mark text first, feel free to just read it aloud for us.
Many people spread their cloaks on the road, while others spread branches that cut in the field. Those who went ahead and those who shouted, Hosanna, is blessed is he who is in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our Father David. Hosanna in the highest heaven. Jesus entered Jerusalem and went into the temple court. He looked around at everything, but since it was already late, he went out to Bethany with his 12.
Thank you. Now I'm going to read this passage from Matthew 21. I'm going to start at verse 1, though. When they had come near Jerusalem and had reached Bethphage at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, "Go into the village ahead of you. Immediately you will find a donkey tied and a colt with her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, just say this: the Lord needs them, and he will send them immediately." This took place to fulfill what had been spoken through the prophet, saying, "Tell the daughter of Zion, look, your king is coming to you, humble and mounted upon a donkey and on a colt, the foal of a donkey." The disciples went and did as Jesus had directed them. They brought the donkey and the colt and put their cloaks on them, and he sat on them. Why do you think the biblical authors would allow these different stories? Why do you think we get 2 different creation stories? Why do you think we get 2 different narratives about how Jesus enters Jerusalem on Palm Sunday? What's the point? Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Others? What about the creation stories? Why would we have 2 creation stories? That seems confusing. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Others? And even with that, Terry, scholars say they are 2 creation stories. So what would be the tension of them both being there? Even if one is, perhaps not even, if you, well, I think what I'm saying is you are explaining for us one of the points, right? Is you would read one as not even a creation story. You would, right? Some people, it may be the verse, the opposite. They may think the second one really gives more detail or really sets up the framework better than in the beginning. Right. Mm-hmm. You said a good word there. You said compilers, but I'm going to use the noun, a different noun. I mean the verb. If we only had one creation story, sure, we could say this is the way it happened, if this is what we believe, right? There is beauty, though, in the fact that this is a compilation. That's what the whole biblical text is, right? There are 66 books, but Lord knows how many authors, because y'all have been studying, you've been beyond there now. But even in Genesis, we don't just say there's one author of Genesis. Some scholars think there's 4. We don't even know who wrote Hebrews. So the whole text is a compilation. It is I had a friend once when we were in seminary say, it reminds me of a mixtape, right? It's bits and pieces of everything, and everyone has a voice in it, right? The same way with the text from the Gospels, right? Y'all obviously are not in New Testament yet, but you know this, that the Gospels each have their own slant. Each Gospel author is writing with a particular view in mind, with a particular audience in mind, and that does not make one story, this is the key that I want to make here. This does not make Genesis 1 better than Genesis 2, or vice versa. It doesn't make Matthew's account better than Mark's account, or vice versa. But in some way, we get the whole picture by the compilation, right? I'm going to change this to a verb, which is compilation. That feels like better. Right? We get the biblical text, we get the narrative of God entering into creation and into the world through Jesus as a compilation. That's what the beauty of it is. What is just a compilation of diversity, right? I want to ask you then, again, today really is all discussion. The first question alone, how has your background influenced the way that you read Scripture? Or if you want a more direct question, the second one, what is one principle that guides your reading of the Bible that you can connect directly to an event in your life? I'll start with an example, not from me, but from theology, right? Liberation theology reads the text, classic liberation theology. So thinking about, good morning. Thinking about, when it emerges in the Latinx context, liberation theology is centering itself with a lens toward the poor. Stand up, sorry. Right, so that's the lens, right? That is the one principle that guides the reading, is that I'm looking for the ways in which this text attends to the poor or to the marginalized. What about you? We're talking about diversities as they show up in the classroom, but we're starting with diversities in history and reading the text. So what is it from your life? What is it that is important to you when you're engaging the Scriptures? Mm-hmm. 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 Judges 11 is a terrible text. Have y'all read that, right? I mean, it's just trauma. It is. I mean, it's just trauma. It is a traumatic text. But what do we do with it, right? It's present. We have to engage it. We have to make sense of it or make meaning of it in some way. Because it is a part of this compilation, right? Excellent. What else? How does our background influence the way we read Scripture? Who all grew up reading Scripture in some way? Right? So, I mean, there are certain ways we read Scripture just because it's the way we've always read Scripture. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's Sunday school, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. And it's interesting that you bring up Job to me. Have y'all gotten that far in Old Testament yet? No, no, I know you're a Bible reader. But Job, a lot of scholars would say was complete myth. That there was no person named Job. This did not happen, right? At all. It's a tall tale. But that is significant because there are also ways in which we tell stories in order to explain things that we can't explain, right? In order to make meaning out of life. So we all suffer. We all have lost something or someone. And when we sit in the ashes of it and say, well, what does this mean? We have to then kind of grow to some type of narrative or go to some type of communal story that says, and when you read it, it's funny because I think its very first verse, it's like, in the land of Uz, there once was a man named Job. And even when you read it, with that inflection, you're like, oh, this is like, Wizard of Oz. Because that's the way it was written. There once was a man, a good and upright man in the land of Uz who did no wrong. But that principle helps us to see a way to engage the text, right? Where the text came to be perhaps does not matter as much as the influence that it has. So a lot of people read Job and find some strength in there, right? Or some pushing on power. Anyone else? What's a principle that guides your reading of the Bible or that's connected to an event? I have one in my life. My brother had cancer when I was in high school. And I remember all these people used to come up, at church. Everybody thought they had power. And would just come up and lay hands and try to pray and do all this stuff. And I remember even then thinking, that's just not how this works. Y'all been doing this every week for I don't know how long, and the boy still got cancer. But it's not about the fact of whether they had power or not, as much as it is, this is a way in which they're reading the text, right? And the way in which they're then translating that text into praxis, which is, oh, well, in the Gospels, all Jesus does is pray for somebody and then they get up. So that's all I got to do. And then it don't happen. And I'm sitting here looking like, okay, well, what do we do now, right? Which that may be, those kind of moments take us to Job, which is, okay, well, we're still in suffering. He still has cancer. What do we do with this? Yeah. And there are the other stories that are not written of when healing just does not come. We can pray all day long, and sometimes people just don't die. My mentor's mother died a month ago, and it happened within 10 hours. She coded. 5 hours later, they were on comfort care. 3-4 hours later, she was dead. And he told everybody to pray, and she still died, But how do we read the text in that way, right? That does not look for the way out always, but is one that's able to sit in the mess. Because people are just going to die, and people are just going to suffer. So how do we engage scripture? This is what liberation theology, a tenet, right? Is how do we read scripture with a lens toward those who are marginalized and suffering? Because that is a present reality. So how does diversity of scripture, or this compilation of scripture, lend itself toward that? This is, I do want y'all to share, particularly on this one. Based on your experience so far, you've been in classes, what, 8 weeks now, maybe 9, something like that? What difficulties have you experienced heretofore in reading or engaging scripture or theology from a new perspective? Well, and perhaps the first question before that may be, have you been encountering new perspectives than the ones you came in with? And if so, how are those resonating with you? Or how are they pushing up against you? Hmm.
Resonate with me, but if I put myself in their shoes, it's like, I understand why you see that. I understand why you don't understand why God would the story of how hard war, like understand why would God kill children or innocent, like, but at the same time, it doesn't affect my faith. So like, I've just been trying to like consider myself.
I think that's an excellent way to do it. I think particularly I like the language trying it on, right? Because there are oftentimes we come into these spaces and we know a lot, but we don't know everything. And so even our experience, someone across the room is sitting there thinking, okay, someone else is trying to think, let me try that on because it is not something I have experienced here before. And I think the word experience is good because it is not a sign of lack or deficit, right? There's not something we don't have. We just may not have experienced it yet. We may not have had exposure to it yet. And there are some times when I got to seminary, I initially heard something and thought, y'all crazy as something. And then 2 weeks, a month later, I was like, oh my gosh, that makes sense. And that's a more generative reading of this text than the one I had before, right? That's an excellent example. Thank you. Somebody else.
One thing I couldn't understand is, at least from my experience, I've seen older colleagues tend to have the mentality like they already know, like you said, kind of like they know everything, because they already been in school, they become teachers, and some of us are just undergrad. So, I feel like that's kind of been, butting heads a little bit when I've seen some of my students and everything like that. Now, I just, yeah, I really, what they say, but so sometimes that's like interesting, but I definitely do have, like I said, that Kappa. That's kind of that difference. The wisdom and knowledge that they do have, but then the Kappa, like they think they know it all already, or they think they know it, or we don't know it. How about that?
You've articulated, thank you. You've articulated now in your first example differences between gender. That's not right, is it? No, I'm talking about his earlier example. No, your earlier example about the one with blood, it really is sex, though, not gender, because there's a difference. Oh, it's a long. No. I mean, so the now I'm naming also. I'm coming from my perspective as someone who does women, gender, sexuality studies and queer theory and stuff. So sex is that which is this is such a terrible breakdown, but sex is that which is connected to one's anatomy as assigned at birth. Okay. Gender is the gender performativity or expression that one lives into.
So did you say one is biological and then one is?
People argue that, yes. Okay. I would not make that argument, but people do argue it.
Is that disrespectful?
I don't think it's disrespectful. It's just compilation, It's the way someone else might write it, but it's not the way I would write it. We can talk about this as an aside, though.
Because I think it's relevant to your conversation being old, super white, female, and privileged.
So I'm the other to so many of you all, and I'm scared. I mean, this has come up in a conversation, kind of informally with other, how I'm just like on eggshells. Like, I don't want to offend, I don't want to upset, and especially with the self-moderation idea that I don't want to talk all the time, but the idea that it's scary to me because I want to, and that's why I love having friends that I can go deep with on some of this stuff, because it's just really a scary time for people like me, I think, in the world, and then especially in a place like here.
Why in the world?
Well, I think it is for me in the world because I think we're afraid to offend people that care about people and are in a helping profession are afraid to offend people. And yet in here, I feel like I'm supposed to learn a little bit more. So I'm supposed to ask you, did I do that wrong? Or was I not very sensitive about that? Or, how could I do this different and better? And I was just going to give you a different perspective for someone that kind of checks all the boxes on my side that we're just trying.
Yeah, I think we're all trying. I think in response to both of your comments, because I still had some comments about yours. I put some of these markers up here, and there are others. We could add others to this list. These kind of markers of identity, which then translate to markers of diversity, that we do not enter the space as the only sex or gender or class or race or nationality, right? Or what else could we add to this list? I'm going to say educational experience. Others? Yeah. I think I could. Yeah, I was just thinking that. Right? We're not the dominant in these groups. That's not what I wanted to say. We are not the only person present in the room. The difference between let me choose my words well. We have opportunity when we come into these spaces. No one should feel like they are walking on eggshells. That is a hard feeling, to sit with. And on the other side of that, one has to interrogate for themselves, why do I feel like I'm walking on eggshells? Because if the way in which I engage the world and the way in which I engage other people naturally is not offensive, then I don't have to worry about offending people, So we each have to do that and to say, well, why am I so nervous about offending people? It's not that there are other people out here trying to get me, but how is it that I want to be in relationship with people? Relationship is the other word I would throw up here besides compilation, because the Genesis 1 and 2 accounts, the Mark and the Matthew text, none of these exist in isolation. Right? One cannot become compilated or be in a community without being in relationships. Arguably, that's what the entire Christian gospel is about, is the sustainability of relationships, right? Even the 10 Commandments are about strained relationships between either us and the divine or us and each other, right? For me, that is my conception of sin. And my only conception of sin is that which strains relationships. Because if I lie on you or cheat on you or kill you, we have a strained relationship. If I take the name of the Lord in vain, or if I don't honor the Sabbath or whatever, then I have a strained relationship with the divine. And that, to me, is what sin is, right? These ways in which relationships break down, the way in which they're strained, and the way in which people are able to cause harm. Contrary to that, then, means what does it mean to be in right relationship with people? And even in these classroom spaces, trying it on is a good way, right? At the end of the day, I'm still going to be who I am, which both of you have articulated, right? And Terry's articulated, right? At the end of the day, we don't leave this space as someone else. I'm still a 27-year-old Black gay man, period. But when I leave this space, there are ways in which I can engage with other people that encourage me to be in right relationship based upon who they are. Does that make sense? But you don't have to it is this delicate balance of learning and listening to who they are, but also you don't have to become who they are. You can't anyway. You can only, at the end of the day, be who you are. And so the same way in which you want to listen and learn from other people, you have to have the confidence and assuredness to know that people also want to listen and to learn from you because they are not you. Let's move on. It's more questions. In terms of people, this is great, right? In terms of people, what difficulties have you experienced in hearing and understanding the ideas of people? So not the text or the materials. How have you rubbed up against other people? And I'm including your professors, so say what you want to say. I won't tell.
In this one, it's really when professors take their personal bias,
Hmm.
teach it less.
Say that last part again.
Like they try to teach the lesson in the personal bias.
Uh-huh.
Ask the question, it's like, I'm not taking no attention, but okay.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to go and ask the question, right? That bothers me. Like something that really is class, it's like they're like, but it's because, for example, if you teach a lesson that I know my grade, we may not talk about some of the church life. It's hard for me to sit there and like pay attention, and you're getting so much information
Mm-hmm.
that someone at the end of the hour is like asking questions and actually control conversation, not the rest of the class with you. But you're not taking a chance to look at the whole class. You're only looking at that 10% of the class that has that education before you have the campus.
Mm.
And it's not helping everybody else in the class.
Excellent example. Have others of you, does that resonate with others of you? Other examples then? Thank you for that. Say that again. What is a matter of race?
So like in regards to like the book you got, I wouldn't even say here, it's just like seeing like the I would say the groups, everybody's kind of
Mm-hmm.
inside out of
Mm-hmm.
that and we live in always way. So I wonder, I think like if we weren't so, easy to get into what we're comfortable with, you know what I'm saying? Like their own race, ethnicity, whatever. I wonder how, more effective classrooms would be kind of have that outside classroom time with each other to kind of understand each other, on that level. But I feel like to a certain extent, we can't really grow,
Mm.
social work if we're still around the same stuff we've been around.
Right.
So
I agree.
here for 2-3 years, why not, go to another group, go to another group that you're not familiar with, you don't know anything about, because watch this, you can also help that type of group when you get out of here. When you get out of here, you experience, you come across another group, another community, and you're not even, dang, I have no idea, I don't even know where to start. But that could have been avoided if you take that time here, which, that's one thing that's kind of important. And this is crazy because I tried to extend that hand, and they look at me like they're not accustomed to that. Like, keep somebody from a different community coming to them. So it's like, just that very is kind of difficult.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Others?
So someone I met on the intro day, doesn't speak English well at all, reached out to me and said, I scanned all these documents because I noticed that you're in the library. And he just gave them to me. He's like, I scanned them all, the whole book, you can have them all, and he just sent them to me. And it was just such a touching thing for me. And it's like, what can I do? How can I help you with English? What can I do? Can I buy you lunch? All that kind of stuff. It's just, and I've never forgotten that act of kindness from someone that didn't speak, that was just so foreign and had so many other issues. Whereas I have yet to experience that level of reaching out to me. And it's touched me always. And every time I see him, I love that. And it's just kind of a way of being there. And I've noticed that with a couple of the other international students that don't come from this community, but it's from another place and it's really struggle. And so that's a gift for me to see those people.
Sure. I think that's, Emory in general, but particularly Candler, has a strong international community, far more than my seminary experience. I don't think Vanderbilt had many, if any. And yeah, I think that's an important thing to point out because although that could be reduced to a matter of race, it is so much more than race. It includes language, it includes customs, it includes a big one for me, family. What does it mean if I have a lot of family whom I'm very close to and they're on the other side of the world? You know? What does fall break look like for me? What does Thanksgiving look like for me or Christmas, right? And these are things that people who are from Georgia and who just drive home on the weekends to see their people, that's a big thing. And it may not be for everybody, but for some people, I'm one of them, family is huge. I flew to Nashville over the weekend and saw my nieces and nephew and flew right back because that's just what I wanted to do. And because, they're growing up and I feel like tomorrow they're going to be 18, I'm going to be mad. But for some people who don't have that luxury, then it makes being in the classroom even more difficult. And that's the thing about all of this, right? Those who fall on the marginalized sides of these spectrums, this then makes its way into the classroom in terms of how one is able to accomplish their work. If I have to spend time, y'all know Toni Morrison, right? So Toni Morrison has this clip where she's talking about the point of racism. And she says, the point of racism is that is a distraction. She's like, because, and she's talking particularly to Black Americans, and as white people will tell you that your head is too big. And so then you go spend a lot of time and research trying to prove that it's not. White people will say, X, Y, and Z. And so then Black people feel like they have to go do all this work to prove that it's not, right? And that's what it keeps us doing, is responding. Same thing could be said about sexism, right? Men saying women can't preach. So then women have to then take on this labor of doing exegetical work to come up with a paper of why they can preach, right? And think about the amount of energy that takes just to respond to an allegation from some type of ism versus the amount of energy that could be put toward just doing your work. But that's what it does. It gets in our psyche in that way that says, no, I have to prove to them that that's not who I am. I have to prove to them that I'm as smart as them. I have to prove to them that I can function in X, Y, or Z ways. And so all of these then, for those who are marginalized on these spectrums, have this extra burden that makes its way into the classroom. So it's not that I just get to come to the classroom and do my work in the same way. I have to be twice as good, right, to perhaps still only get half as much credit. And that's true whether one is an international student, whether one is a person of color, whether one is a marginalized gender or sexuality, right? And that's why these kind of things are important when we talk about the classroom, because it is not just how one shows up in the classroom. It is connected to what you were saying about the work that one has to do here and afterwards. Some of y'all, I don't know actually, there's only 5, but one of you may end up preaching, one of you may end up doing chaplaincy, one of you may end up in a nonprofit, et cetera. And that's what you're here for, is to get to that, to get the tools and the training to get there. So, I mean, anybody got time to bother with all this other bullshit? Last one, maybe. What are healthy and helpful ways? Oh, there's one more after this. What are healthy and helpful ways to address differing opinions in the conversation, in the classroom? This is where I will invite practical tips and or offer them. But what do you think? Healthy and helpful ways to address differing opinions in the classroom? Excellent. There's something I used to do in my classrooms. Well, all of my classes, we had what we called commitments to hospitality, and we would agree to them at the beginning of every semester. And one of those was to always assume the best intent. So if someone says something that rubs me the wrong way, I can jump down their throat. I mean, that's the option. But before I do that, let me clarify, let me assume that that's not what you meant. Let me assume the best intent and clarify. Ask ask a question to make sure I'm understanding clearly what you were saying. Because it may be just a miscommunication. Excellent. What other things? Yeah. No. Yeah. It's a form of compartmentalizing, right? That in some ways, as I just said, y'all here to get a degree. At the end of the day, you want your MDiv, your MTS, whatever it is, you can go out and do whatever is next. So yeah, this the way my mom used to say, this don't pay the bill. It does in the long run, but in this very moment, Emory is taking more of your money than it is giving to you. So yeah, it don't pay the bill. What else? Let's hear one more, and then I have another slide after this, actually. Hmm. One, I agree. And to kind of combine all of y'all's points, my mentality in the classroom, even as a professor, is thinking two things. One, is whatever they're saying or thinking going to harm somebody? That is my number one. If what somebody is saying or thinking is going to be harmful or detrimental to somebody else, I'm going to speak up because they may not know that they're causing harm. The other thing, though, for me, the other half of that is if it's not causing harm and it's just something I disagree with or I think they're ignorant, I'm going to be ignorant. So, I do not give, this is just me, I do not give my energy to that. You can be stupid. I don't care. At the end of the day, I'm going to write my paper, I'm going to get my degree, and I'm going to do what I'm going to do. I don't care what you do. I care to the extent if what you are doing, though, is causing harm to somebody else. Again, straining these kinds of relationships. If you're doing that, then I just need you to know, hey, baby, that's a very harmful interpretation. And this type, because some interpretations, we all know this, lead to physical harm and violence. So, if it's something like that, I'm going to have to say something. But other than that, similar to what you have said, you both have said, don't be stupid then. Or not stupid, just go and have a different opinion. I'm not in the business of changing minds. Lastly, how can you engage with ideas or authors you may not agree with while still having a, quote, productive conversation? And then the B question to that is, when is it necessary to resist ideas? So my answer that I just gave would be a response to the last one, right? I think it's necessary to resist ideas when they cause harm. That is when I'm going to say, no. But how do we engage with these ideas or these authors or these other people where we can still have a productive conversation, not to where we just shut down and back away, but how can there still be some type of dialogue? What do you think? One answer has already been given, questions. I think questions take us a long way. And I think, this is going to sound snarky, but it really is not. I think questions make people interrogate their own self, right? If someone makes a claim and you ask them a question about it, which makes them think, a little bit more about what they said, and then if you ask them another question about it, they then have the responsibility to back up their own stuff, right? Or to interrogate it their own self. You don't have to do that labor. You don't have to. You can completely ask questions. How did you get to that conclusion? Do you have any evidence for this? You could just trail the questions until they themselves say, oh, I don't know. Or let me come back to you, or let me rethink it. That's a very good way to have a productive, generative conversation. What else? Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Bring somebody else in. I would say that's also true for your work, right? If you're writing a paper, obviously come to the writing center, but you can also share it with a colleague and say, can you read this over for me and tell me if it makes sense? Or tell me if I'm missing something. Tell me if I'm neglecting something. I think neglect is a good word. It's one I'm sitting with a lot these days. Because some of our work just neglects people or things because they just don't come into our mind. But someone else might say, hey, you didn't even talk about how this affects such and such. right? You didn't even talk about what this scripture means for this community. So yeah, bringing someone else in, engaging this iron and sharpening iron, I think is an excellent way. Anybody else? Say it one more time. Yeah. I think why is always a good question, right? And that's also a good question for when people are so adamant about holding on to something. You know, there's a certain type of theological reading or a certain type of whatever they want to hold on to. That's a very good question to say, why is this so important to you? And not in a demeaning way, but what is behind this for you, right? You want to read this scripture in this way, and there is a reason. But why? Why does it have to be read this way? Why can't there be an alternative interpretation? And again, that will help them decide for their own self, oh, what I'm expressing is not even about this scripture. It's about this other thing behind it for me. But that other thing behind it for them may have nothing to do with you. So you don't have to engage it the way they would. But they perhaps need that interrogation. Anything else? I think it's my last slide. It is. All right, friends. I hope this conversation has been helpful for you. If not, thanks for coming anyway. Next week, the next 2 weeks are two big ones, which are the Art of Academic Writing. So Art of Academic Writing Part 1 is next week. Art of Academic Writing Part 2 is the week after that. So that will be very much structured like the other presentations. And then after that, there's only one more, which is preparing for final exams. Be well. Go in peace.